Welcome back to 321 study. Still on paper PSAF, Public Sector Accounting and Finance. And now let us go into a new topic as we discuss government construction contracts. Now, of course, we are going to first of all look at the background of awarding contracts themselves before we really talk about the accounting for contracts. All right, and then of course, with that background, we're going to look more at the provisions of the Public Procurement Act of 2007. When you look at it, that government awarding contracts is government buying services and goods and works. All right, so that will be done in the background of the Public Procurement Act 2007. When it comes to the accounting for contracts, we will look at IPSAS 11, which regulates construction contracts. Now, obviously, the contractors themselves may not be government entities, such that IPSAS 11 may not apply to them. IPSAS 11 applies to somebody who functions as a contractor. So if a government entity functions as a contractor, then they would apply IPSAS 11. Okay, if the NMPC was implementing a contract for a foreign entity or for a private sector entity or something like that, okay, then you will have a government entity operating as a contractor. But of course, in the most cases, the government entity would be the client. But anyway, of course, in the event that the government that another entity that the government entity operates as a contractor, IPSAS 11 would have to be applied. Now, of course, when the government issues contracts out to tender, the accounting for it does not go to IPSAS 11, but of course will be dictated by the accounting basis for which the government entity applies. If the government is pursuing the cash basis of accounting, the accounting requirements are simple, just a matter of simple entries that track the movement of cash from one account to another. If it's accrual based, of course, then you have to track the movement of rights and obligations, and of course present amounts accruing to and from in the various financial statements. So we will look at that. Now, of course, first of all, going into the Public Procurement Act 2007. Okay. Then, of course, we'll note that the main highlights of the act are the establishment of the NCPP and the BPP, the National Council on Public Procurement, and the Bureau of Public Procurement. And these two act as regulators. Then the Act attempts to harmonize the existing regulations, set standards, and form the framework for the development of public procurement in Nigeria. So let us begin to look at, of course, the provisions of the Public Procurement Act. And first of all, we'll be beginning it at looking at the Tenders Board. Now, of course, the Tenders Board, this would refers to a body authorized to receive tenders, just say procurement tenders, on behalf of the government. Of course, the Tenders Board will be responsible for selecting a finance supplier. And of course, agreeing terms with the supplier. All right. If now, when we look at the tenders board that are currently extant in the Nigerian environment, there is the Ministerial Tenders Board. Of course, this relates to ministries, all right? And of course, parastatals themselves have tenders boards as well. The armed forces even the police, and the last tenders board we have is the Federal Executive Council. Federal Executive Council. Again, like I've said, this is like the board of executive directors for the federal government. There are some contracts that cannot be seen by any other board but by the FEC. FEC is currently the top tenders board. This function may in the near future be relinquished to the NCPP, as would be suggested by the Public Procurement Act, but for now it's still being heard by the Federal Executive Council. So these are tenders boards. When it comes to the ministerial tenders boards, all right, for contracts between 0 to 5 million, the full board does not need to convene, but the permanent secretary, that is the accounting officer, can approve contracts within these limits in that ministry. Now, of course, when it comes to contracts that between 5 to 100 million, then of course the tenders board needs to convene. And over 100 million, then of course this requires the attention of the FEC. Now, this is so that the executive arm of government can have full control of larger contracts. Now, the tenders boards in general are usually composed of the permanent secretary, that's the accounting officer, and heads of departments. So, the permanent sec, okay, plus the heads of departments in the ministries. When it comes to parastatals, the limit for parastatals have a smaller limit than ministries, and the permanent secretary of a parastatal, accounting officer, can only see between 0 to 2.5 million naira worth contracts, and contracts that exceed this range but are not up to 50 million can be heard by the tenders board of that parastatal. However, if it goes above 50 million, then a ministerial tenders board will have to see to it. And if it goes above 100 million, again, this goes towards the Federal Executive Council. So you all see how these bodies interact when it comes to hearing tenders. Now, if we look at the process, all right, of receiving tenders, first of all, we expect that the tenders board will hold out invitations to bids. All right, they will advertise. Usually, there's a procurement journal. The advertisement will be placed in that journal, in, of course, local and international newspapers and publications. Advertisements can be placed there. Okay, so of course, when you invite to tender, you can therefore receive bids. All right, and then these bids will be evaluated by the tenders board before the supplier is finally selected. Of course, there are a lot of activities between these three processes, but broadly, the process can be fit into this simple three-step process. Now, we're going to look at some specific procurement methods. When it comes to it, in general, the Act requires that all procurements be done through open competitive bidding. Open referring to the fact that you shouldn't restrict anybody from tendering. Competitive meaning that we need more than one supplier so that we can get the best terms. And in this issue of open competitive bidding, all right, it could be national or even international. That means open to foreign suppliers submitting their own tenders. All right. Now, of course, there are times when a particular procurement activity will not pass through open competitive bidding. There are restrictions placed on such procurement methods, not just quantitative restrictions. That is, of course, there is an amount. Okay, no contract exceeding a particular amount can be done through non-open competitive bidding. That is, for example, the tenders board will just search through the market and select a supplier without a competitive bidding process, or they will just go straight to a supplier without even surveying different suppliers. Those are some alternatives to open competitive bidding. There are restrictions to how much you can spend when going that route, as well as what criteria must be met before going that route. Usually, the criteria is that there are limited suppliers or there is no other supplier. In such a case, obviously, it makes sense that there will be no open competitive bidding. Okay, but of course, there are other situations where not going through the whole stage of open competitive bidding can be permitted. So, for now, for the sake of understanding, because the restrictions and the methods are sort of different for different procurement contracts. When it comes to purchasing goods and services, these goods and services, this excludes construction contracts, all right, which we will classify as works. Okay, all right, so it's different. So when it comes to goods and services, okay, all contracts above 100 million naira must be subject to national and international open competitive bidding. Now, national bidding, all right, that is, it's not open to international suppliers. Contracts that are between 2.5 million to 100 million naira. All right, this can just be done through national bidding. Okay, and then a market search for suppliers without the entire tendering process or bidding process. Okay, this can be done for contracts that are less than 2.5 million naira. for supply of goods. And then single source direct procurement, that is without even going through without even looking for other suppliers. Okay, this can be done when the contract is less than 250,000 naira, such that if you just want to buy a carton of papers, there's no need for national and international competitive bidding, because such a contract to buy a carton of paper will be too small to justify the costs of publishing the advertisement and then the tendering process, convening the ministerial board, and so on and so forth. Of course, when it comes to the selection of a final supplier, all right, the objective of any selection is to get responsive bid. That is the supplier with the lowest price that will satisfy the requirements. All right? Because value, if you're going for value for money, then economy is one of your objectives. You want to get economy without sacrificing efficiency and effectiveness. Economy, of course, is getting low cost. Efficiency is getting good output for the input. Effectiveness, of course, is achieving your objectives. All right? So when you're selecting, you want to get good quality input at the lowest possible price. So if it comes to a comparison between Pepsi and Coke, Pepsi is 150 naira, Coke is Pepsi is 100 naira, Coke is 150 naira. The tenders board will want to go for Pepsi because even though the satisfaction is the same thing, Pepsi is cheaper. Did I just start a riot? Now, of course, and this should be done, the evaluation and selection should be done by a committee staffed with sufficiently qualified professionals. That is, the tenders board can set up a committee to look into all the bids and select one. The reason for this requirements is quite obvious. You need qualified professionals to tell whether or not the bid will reach an appropriate quality level for the price. There may be payment of bid security. Bid security may be required. This can be taken as a requirement of commitment from the bidder. You need to make like a deposit of 2% of the bid price, or by way of banker's guarantee. And when it comes to mobilization fees, that is, okay, you have won the bid, fantastic. Mobilization should not exceed 15% of contract price. And there's even a requirement that if after selecting a supplier, okay, if payments to that supplier are delayed, all right, there should be provision for interest to compensate the supplier for the delayed payment of their monies. Now, when it comes to works, the whole selection process would be similar, but the quantitative thresholds for the different types of procurements, for different procurement methods, are slightly different. The contracts for construction can be larger quantitatively, it can be larger financially than contracts for the supply of goods or of services. So national bidding, all right, national bidding need not be restricted to 100 million, all right, and can go as high as 1 billion. That is for national competitive bidding. But for any amounts that exceed 1 billion, then it must be open to national and international, international bidding. Just saying that is both Nigerian and foreign suppliers will be allowed to tender. Then, of course, if you're going to do a market survey, again, the threshold is 2.5 million, should be less than 2.5 million. If you're going to go single sourcing, then of course you want it to be less than 250,000 naira. Consultant services, although we examine goods and services, but those services are non-consultant services. Consultant services, different procurement methods. All right. Of course, while you can have the single source direct procurement, which of course to be less than 250,000 naira. Okay. Consultants can be searched for by looking at their qualifications, all right, such that there need not be a competitive bidding process for consulting services. Okay. However, this search for a qualified consultant, okay, needs to be less than the threshold of 25 million naira. So these are some of the provisions of the Acts. There are other special methods of tendering. There are two-stage tenders. Two-stage tenders, of course, this is like an interview, where in the first stage they will find a criteria to eliminate the majority of those that supply, or those that have tendered, and then of course they will now actually select from the second, now have a second stage where they will require those that passed the first stage to submit a fresh tender. Okay, of course you can submit the same tender, but you know, if you think that that's going to be your best, your best shot, no problem. Restricted tendering, of course, is a case where the tender is restricted. All right, I mean, this is a case where rather than having the procurement open to everyone, rather than having open access, you have a case where only a few people are called to tender. And emergency procurements occurs usually as response to emergencies. That is, things like natural disasters or attacks. In that case, an emergency procurement, for aid materials might be needed, and then of course the whole issue of going through tendering process might not be required. Of course, when it comes to disposal of public property, this is not purchasing, but this is now selling. Again, this is open to what? This should be open to competitive bidding. That is, of course, the government will receive lots of offers and select the one that they would prefer. Okay, and of course, this may be done through sales, outright sale, a rental, lease, and auction, by giving out franchises, or of course intergovernmental transfers. That is not selling to the public, but transferring to another arm of government. Now, in the very next session, we will of course look at accounting for contracts itself under the cash basis, the accrual basis, and of course we will be discussing the IPSAS 11, and to a slight extent IPSAS 12. Thank you very much. This is 3 to 1 study. We'll see you in the next lesson.